For those of you listening, climbing through your ratings or working on your CFI, my advice is to embrace the process. Even if it's slower at times, the lessons you learn along the way will make you a better pilot and a better teacher.
How many people go through life doing work they really don't like, but every day dreaming of, say, working in the aviation industry? They say it's too late. They think it would be too hard. They think it would go against conventional norms. If you never go after what you want, you'll never have it. This is Fly the Transition. Join us as we soar through the captivating stories of individuals embracing a thrilling journey into the aviation industry. From pilots spreading their wings to mechanics fine-tuning the engines and a myriad of industry professionals, each with a unique tale to tell. Get ready to dive into the diverse backgrounds, the pivotal moments that propelled their leap, and the sheer determination that transformed their aspirations into reality. We're not just about dreams. We're about making them take flight. Welcome to Fly the Transition. And now your host, Jim Schilling.
Hello everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Fly the Transition. I'm your host, Jim, and today I'm going to give a bit of a personal update before diving into some reflections on my CFI journey. I know things have been a little quiet lately, and episodes aren't churning out as fast as I was maybe a month or two ago, and I want to talk a little bit about why that is. I've had a lot going on in my personal and professional life, both in aviation, my full-time job, and the kids going back to school. So with that, it has put some delays in the production timing of putting some of these episodes out. So as far as my professional life, I'm changing roles at work from one managerial role to another. And as I do that, I'm switching working groups, for lack of a better term. The unit that I'm switching to is more in kind of the wheelhouse of what my background and passion is within my profession. So I'm really excited for that opportunity to get back involved with that. But it can also be kind of stressful just changing roles, as you might be able to imagine. It's been a bit of a balancing act as I try to maintain daily operations within our current working groups. But I also have new responsibilities and training to do with my new role, as well as training my replacement who's going to be taking my spot in my old work group. So it's no easy task. It's been a lot of juggling. And admittedly, it's kind of hard sometimes to let go of some of your responsibilities when you're used to kind of being that go-to person for the things you used to handle. So the person that's replacing me is an excellent choice. He's going to do great, but we'll just need some time to deep dive what I do and get him trained up. Another thing I realized in the preparation for him coming into my role is you don't really realize how much you might do on a day-to-day basis, or throughout the year for that matter, until you sit down and start trying to have to figure out how to train someone in that role. There's a lot of things I only do a couple of times a year as far as ordering certain things that you kind of forget about until that window pops up. So having to document all those things in a manner that I'm able to pass on to my replacement has taken a lot of work too. So because of that, I've had to focus a little bit more energy on this professional transition, which I'll be honest has caused some delays in the production of this podcast and a few other projects. But I'm still here. We're still going to move forward, and I appreciate all of you who have stuck with me through this and offered me supportive words of encouragement as I've moved along. I think a lot of you will probably relate to this juggling act if you've ever stepped into a new role, or those of you who have made a career transition into aviation from something else. You kind of understand how you have to balance those two things as you move along. I will steal a line from somebody that I thought was really kind of interesting. When you feel like you've got all these balls in the air and you're juggling all this stuff and you feel like you're going to drop the ball. More often than not, if you're juggling all these different things and you drop a ball, that ball's still going to be on the ground for you to pick back up and throw back in the air when you need to. That's all about prioritizing, figuring out what balls you need to have in the air in the first place, and going back to those ones you might have temporarily dropped to pick back up and toss into the air and get in the mix again. So I kind of like that analogy, and it's been pretty helpful for me as I've tried to, juggle all these different balls I have in the air right now. So the other thing that's taken up a lot of time, obviously, is my CFI training. And honestly, this has taken way longer than I anticipated it would have. There's just various things have popped up in the way, and this has kind of been the way it's been through all of my different ratings, from instrument on. Private pilot was a little bit different because of my schedule with work, but instrument rating on, it's been a bit of a long process for each of those ratings. But what I want to mention here is that's okay at this stage in life. It's all about where you're at with your personal transition. And for me, I don't need to be a CFI tomorrow morning to make my transition to an airlines or another flying gig. This is a long, kind of slow burn process for me to become a CFI and then build up my credentials as a CFI and my experience so that down the road, I can do this as a retirement gig. So that's for where I'm at personally, so that works for me. But it does make things take a little bit longer when you drag this out like I have. So pros and cons, something to take from that if you're one of those ones that are kind of working on your ratings for a long time. Obviously, the quicker you work through a rating, the more you're going to be able to retain the stuff you did at the very beginning. Now, I'm going to have to go back and review some of the things I did at the beginning, but fortunately, because this is your knowledge that you should have as a private pilot, you're just expanding upon that, figuring out how to teach it to somebody else. I feel pretty good about the earlier knowledge stuff that I've been able to build upon. So the good news is I'm down to just 2 more lesson plans to write. That's right, just 2 more lesson plans, and I will have that part behind me. I'll be able to go back and make some revisions and just refamiliarize myself with my earlier lesson plans and get ready for that all-important CFI check ride. And candidly, by the time some of you listen to this, I will be done writing those lesson plans. I will be presenting them later this week, so they need to be written. So I will be just one more step closer to having my CFI rating. So as I've wrapped up these lesson plans and I've been kind of pushing the podcasts off to write those lesson plans, once I got into a space where I was ready to record again, I felt like it'd be a good time to have a bit of a reflective process and talk a bit about what I've learned about myself and flying and teaching for that matter that I just didn't necessarily anticipate as I began this CFI journey. I'd say first and foremost would be patience in my own flying. I am 100% my own harshest critic. Anyone who's known me for more than about 5 minutes knows that I'm really kind of critical of myself and I'm always trying to strive for that perfection. And yes, I'm aware that perfection isn't attainable, but somewhere along the line, hopefully we can find excellence. No, I didn't make that up, but I really like that saying, so I'm stealing it and I'm using it. So take that for what it's worth. So one of the things that it's taught me about being patient with my own flying is knowing that as you're working towards a rating and as you keep driving and you keep making progress, there's going to be things that you're going to have hiccups with. So whether that is my right seat flying, which I struggled with for a while, or trying to figure out the right format and items to put my lesson plan and preparing to work with students, I've learned that I just have to slow down a little bit. You can't necessarily rush through things as you're trying to build a foundation, because that foundation is where I'm going to continue to build the rest of my instructing off of. So I realize that if I'm rushing through things, you can miss things. I think we take for granted sometimes rushing through a checklist, forgetting a small little detail here and there. But in learning to teach and kind of reinforcing some of my early habits that I've developed of using your checklist, I hope that will help as I build patience and being a little bit more methodical on my own flying and giving myself a little bit of grace when things don't exactly go perfect. My instructor told me very early on in my flying that it's okay to be wrong, don't stay wrong. And that's something that I have to remind myself sometimes, that it's all right to have those small little deviations and you're flying in a certain maneuver. As long as you're not like significantly busting the standards and you correct it right away, it's not as big of a deal as you might make it out to be in your head. Yes, we want to fly maneuvers perfect. Yes, we want to be, proficient and great in our piloting skills, but we're going to have hiccups along the way. We're going to have a bad day of flying. We're going to have the landings where we hope that our landings don't think about us like we think about them when we walk away. But again, all learning moments. This is something where this is a lifelong learning journey. This is a license to learn, and that's what we need to take those as. So as I record this episode, I'm all about stealing other types of ideas, so that's what I'm going to do with this next thought as well. I'm going to steal a line from the movie Top Gun, the original, not Maverick, where Maverick isn't engaging again. He's having struggles after Goose is killed in that crash, right? So, but when you have a bad flight, you can't re-engage or you're kind of beating yourself up. Viper says something that I think is really important here, and it's keep sending them up. And that's kind of what I would tell myself. I'd have a flight that wasn't great with my right seat landings or a certain maneuver, and I'd get down on myself and like, man, is this right seat flying and CFI thing for me? If I can't, nail these maneuvers and be a good example, am I going to be a good instructor? Well, of course you are. You just have to learn. It's a totally different muscle memory, totally different sight picture in that other seat. You just have to, you're learning a new thing. So my instructor continued to encourage me, you got to keep going up. You got to keep going up. So that line from the movie kind of stuck in my head of keep sending them up, to the point where I'd start to tell myself that. And granted, I have not gotten up nearly as much as I probably should have, admittedly, but again, some of that has been just career transition, timing, weather, all that stuff. So all that, again, goes in that space of finding some grace for yourself and working through the process. Another takeaway from me is that you learn so much more about like some of the nuances of aviation by studying to be able to teach it. I mean, I could go and take the knowledge test for my private pilot or whichever rating and, be able to cover aerodynamics, for example, and kind of understand what I'm talking about. But it's a different thing to take that same concept and now explain it to someone else who has no idea what you're talking about when it comes to aviation or these different concepts or knows who Bernoulli is or any of that stuff. So that was a big takeaway for me, diving a little bit deeper into some of these knowledge areas to really have a good understanding so I'm able to then give that information to a student. Taking again aerodynamics, I think for me, once I stopped looking at it just as these principles and I looked at air literally as a fluid, for whatever reason, that was a light bulb moment for me to understand how air is moving over a wing. Just picture it like water moving over it. There's a couple of videos on YouTube of, people taking an aircraft wing design and holding that under a faucet, and you could see what happens as you increase your angle of attack and how the water starts to break away, just like the air would when you get to a critical angle of attack. And like I said, I don't know why, but it was a huge light bulb moment for me. So that is now able to help me break that down for students, and it's also something I've included in my lesson plans, videos for people to watch of that concept in case they have the same struggles understanding that air movement over the wing concept like I did. It's simple, but it's accurate. Not only do I hope that will make me a better instructor, but it also helps me understand what's happening with the airplane, make me a more knowledgeable and confident pilot. And I think I talked about this a couple episodes ago, but spin training. I mean, how many of us go into stalls and your instructor warns you of, the stall spin scenario, and spins are scary, spins are evil. And I think that for some, intended or not, spins are just that, and they can give you a little bit of anxiety. Doing spin training was probably well overdue for me and something that I got so much out of. Being able to experience a spin and figuring out how much it really takes to put yourself in that situation. And not only that, but how to recover from it and knowing that at the end of the day, your airplane wants to fly if you let it. So you're not just going to fall out of the sky because you've exceeded the critical angle of attack. You're going to stall and you're going to recover properly just like you've been trained. But I think not having that feel and understanding what it actually feels like to spin, especially power off stalls, I kind of struggle with those. So spin training was really huge for me. If you haven't done it, even if you're not necessarily going to the CFI route, I highly suggest you do some spin training just to experience that and know what it feels like to get into it and recover. Next, let's talk about communication skills. I'm learning along the way, especially earlier on in my CFI training, that the way I'm explaining things is the way I would explain it to another pilot, which is not necessarily the best way to communicate with a new student. When we talk pilot to pilot, we're relying on a lot of jargon and shorthand that we're already familiar with because we quote unquote speak the language. But with a student, everything to them is new. That kind of talk is going to go right over the head and you're going to lose them. So in that space of everything is brand new to them, that includes the language. And we got to get them up to speed and kind of teach them the language of being a pilot. It's not necessarily about dumbing things down, but it's about starting where they're at and building a base from there. And in doing that, I realized how important it is to make sure that I'm not just understanding the basics myself, but I can explain them clearly in plain language that isn't full of a bunch of pilot jargon to help build that language of the pilot up for my students. That's another thing my instructor is really good at, having me work through my lessons and asking me questions when I say things that are pilot talk. Another thing that I've learned as I've built lesson plans and revised lesson plans is that you are always learning and you have to continue to find the changes that are happening within the FAA or theory or procedures. You can't just rely on what you already know or what you were taught 10 years ago when you learned how to be a pilot. This is a constant journey of learning, a constant journey of continuing education, and staying up on these changes. I've experienced this a few times, especially with a couple of little changes with the ACSs that have occurred where I've written a lesson plan inadvertently using the old ACS information and it's been updated. So just a matter of, again, slowing down, making sure I'm using the right publications and procedures and theories as I'm developing these lesson plans. I'd say that too has been somewhat humbling. It's really easy for us to get comfortable, I think. And this is where stolen line number 3 for the evening comes in. Early on in my professional career, I was told by a trainer, the day you stop learning something in this job is the day you need to quit, because it is a constant journey of learning and evolving to keep yourself safe. And the same thing applies in aviation. So it ties back again to this is a license to learn no matter what rating you're looking at. So as I wrap things up and get ready to write those last 2 lesson plans, a few thoughts. While the journey to becoming a CFI has taken longer than I expected it to, it's been incredibly rewarding. It's taught me a lot of patience in myself and in others, given me that deeper understanding of some of these aviation concepts that I kind of just took for granted probably, and it's forced me to grow in ways that I didn't necessarily see coming. For those of you listening, climbing through your ratings or working on your CFI, my advice is to embrace the process. Even if it's slower at times, the lessons you learn along the way will make you a better pilot and a better teacher. And for those of you thinking of making a transition to aviation and you haven't even started yet, let this be a lesson that there is always something new to learn, and that's part of the excitement. I appreciate you taking the time to sit down and listen to this episode of Fly the Transition. And if you like what I'm doing, please go on to wherever you're listening to this podcast. Leave me a rating and review. I'll read any reviews that we get on the podcast. And if you're interested in being a guest on a future episode, or you have questions or thoughts on today's episode or another show topic, please feel free to reach out on any of my social media platforms, or you can email me at flythetransition@gmail.com. I love hearing from people out in the community, and I love sharing your story and your feedback. Thanks again for joining me on this episode of Fly the Transition. And until next time, keep your eyes on the skies and your dreams soaring high.
You've been listening to Fly the Transition. Life is too short for you not to do what you love. And our passion is to give you all the tools you need to make the transition from doing what you do to being in the aviation industry. We hope you've enjoyed the show. If you did, make sure to like, rate, and review. And we'll be back soon. But in the meantime, you can reach out by email at flythetransition@gmail.com. Find us on Facebook at Fly the Transition. And the website for Flying Midwest Media is flyingmidwest.com. Keep soaring. See you next time on Fly the Transition.